Hey, what's up, y'all? Y'all know my slogan. I don't know it all, but I know what I've been through. Now, before we get into this video, please make sure you head on down to Instagram and follow us on our official Instagram page at Hookah Anonymous _. We're able to be a little more explicit, a little more uncensored, and share content freely without running the risk of having our channel terminated. So, once again, make sure you head on down to Instagram and follow us on our official Instagram page at Hookah Anonymous _. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers, so if you like this video, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so you're notified every time we drop new content. Now let's get into what you guys came here to see. Now, throughout the years, we often hear about kingpins throughout the 70s and 80s that made a lot of money in the height of the drug era. But usually they all have one thing in common. They're all men. Although a lot of men ruled the drug game and had their crews, just like them, there were also female bosses as well. Whenever we hear about female kingpins, aka queenpins, the first person everyone thinks of is the godmother, aka Griselda Blanco. And although she did have things on lock and ruled with an iron fist, there was also other women who did so as well. Which brings us to our next subject, Avonda Dowling. A woman who was not spoken about as much, but was just as big as any other kingpin / queenpin out there when it came to the streets. Not only was she known for making a lot of money in Florida, she was also not afraid of going to war with the most notorious gang, the Boobie Boys. The Boobie Boys were also one of Miami's most violent gangs, which according to Miami police were responsible for over 100 deaths over an 8-year period that started in 1993. The Boobie Boys formed out of its leader, Kenneth Boobie Williams. It was reported that in the 80s, the gang would build a drug empire worth $80 million. Sounding unstoppable, the crew would be ruthless, violence-wise, and make a lot of money, making them a force to be reckoned with. The true definition of money, power, and respect. However, throughout the height of it all, who would expect that a woman and her crew would be the one to challenge the Boobie Boys when everyone else feared them and actually made them suffer quite a few losses? And despite the hype around the Boobie Boys, an ex-homicide detective by the name of Jeff Lewis stated that they would bring in informants and question them about Black Girl, aka Avonda Dowling. And judging from what he was told, they came to the conclusion that Avonda was actually more worse than Kenneth Boobie Williams himself. To know Avonda was to love her, as she had the heart of gold. Most people worship the street vernacular of her, but forget to bring up the charitable side of Avonda that gave back to her people despite how she gained her money. People glorify those such as Pablo Escobar for being a Robin Hood to Colombia, and Avonda was no different. Sources who knew Avonda would say that she loved helping kids in the community, as she did back to school drives, help pay for kids to go to college, buy school clothes and supplies, and even help pay rent and utility bills of the residents over in Overtown. In a 15-year run, Avonda was involved in a lot, and if you asked who she was, the answer would vary depending on who you're asking. Her knack for success would trickle down to her offspring, as her son would graduate college and be drafted into the NFL to play for the Philadelphia Eagles, and that son would be known as Javante Jackson. Now before y'all get in the comments and reply that we're glorifying the streets and the fast life by covering stories such as this one, just know that that's not the case. Sometimes these stories are done not to only be informative, but to also help those who may be in the streets or thinking about being in the streets to realize that despite all the money, cars, and materialistic things, the streets have one or two endings, which is jail or death. And maybe that'll change the mind of someone considering the streets. Also, some of these kingpins and street lords are only painted in a negative light when it comes to the media. Some of these stories give an inside look on these individuals, displaying a different side of them that not everyone might have known aside from the negativity that's painted on mainstream. Despite what they've done, everybody makes mistakes, but that don't mean that we give up on them. So with that being said, y'all subscribe to the platform if you aren't already, and hit that thumbs up button so we can get this video into the algorithm and spread awareness about Avonda Dowling, aka Vonda Jackson, aka Black Girl. Now born in 1963, Avonda was known to be smart, tall, slender, and athletic. She was from Overtown, Miami, and grew up in a time where segregation was still a thing and African Americans weren't able to just settle down anywhere and dwell at certain places in Miami, Florida. Overtown, however, was different. They did the complete opposite and allowed blacks to go everywhere they pleased in the area, which is why Overtown also gained the nickname Colored Town. Now real quick, please keep in mind that despite what we're told, if you do proper research, you will find that Overtown was a very thriving neighborhood for African Americans. But just like everything else we have, as soon as they see it's thriving, somehow they take it away, and they were able to disrupt the economy in Overtown by building the highway system through the area. This was caused by the Federal Aid Highway Act in 1956 that was approved by Congress under the power of President Eisenhower. Implemented in the late 50s and early 70s, it specifically costed urban, aka African American communities that were the ones that suffered the most at the hand of the system. More than 475,000 householders and more than 1 million people were displaced throughout the country because of the federal roadway construction. The highways cut through the urban neighborhoods as it disturbed certain thriving economies, disrupting pedestrian landscape and caused pollution in the air quality. Those same communities lost homes, churches, green space, stores, and local businesses that was in the area that kept the dollar circulating in the community, which helped the locals keep it within their economy just so it can thrive. Anywhere that minorities populated from New York, Miami, Chicago, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh, Oakland, Nashville, Atlanta, Baltimore, and plenty more. By the time the highway system were complete, we've seen a big shift in what we knew as urban America. Robert Moses, who was New York City's construction coordinator and was the chairman of the New York City Slum Clearance Committee, oversaw all public work projects, including the roadways, bridges, tunnels, parks, and housing projects. He was never elected as any official in the city, but held great power just like one. He was the one that came up with the very idea that, quote, the best way to get rid of the supposed slums that was occupied by the blacks were to build highways through them. During the 1959 speech, he would also say, quote, we can't let minorities dictate that this century-old chore will be put off another generation or finally abandoned. The highway construction must go right through cities and not around them. Now to this day, Moses' main projects created in New York are the Cross, Bronx, and Brooklyn Queens expressways, both symbolizing exactly how Moses felt as they both cut through the heart of the Bronx and Brooklyn Red Hook neighborhoods. Robert Moses needs to be covered in a whole nother video because he has an interesting story himself, giving his thoughts on urban America and playing a big role in strategically dividing minorities from everyone else whenever he was involved in a project. But that's another story. Now back in the days in Overtown, the way everything was set up, if you think inflation is something today, back then it was really no resources for African Americans when it comes to jobs or even education, making it hard to make ends meet, which resulted in almost everyone choosing an alternate route to make some kind of money to earn a living. Miami is a drug haven for many suppliers and dealers due to its close connection to Central and South America from places such as Panama, Cuba, Bahamas, Costa Rica, Honduras, Mexico, and Colombia. At the time, this is when guys such as Pablo Escobar and Noriega and others were providing their product worldwide, and without the knowledge and technology they have today, it was easy to get their product into the hands of American dealers and users by using the way of places such as Florida, the port of Miami to be exact. Most commonly, these drugs were transported through the waters, and although not all made it through, corrupted coast guards would be paid off to allow product to enter with ease. Many kids coming up in that time witnessed their parents struggle and decided to turn to the streets at a young age. Avonda attended Carroll City High School, and that was her highest level of education completed, as she didn't choose to go to college. If Carroll City sounds familiar to you, it gained mainstream attention as Rick Ross would coin the phrase Triple C's, which stood for Carroll City Cartel, in the beginning of his music career. Shortly after graduating, Vonda hit the streets early and gained a reputation of a petty thief who would run into stores and grab very expensive items and then run out. Avonda would land a criminal record in the late 80s that involved various of charges, including unlawful use of weapons, trafficking, and aggravated battery. It's one incident that transpired in 1991 where she beat a man with a bat, left the scene, and drove back to the scene just to beat him with the same bat again. Then in 1992, she tried to run over one of her former workers with a car after they got into a fight. By the time the late 90s came into play, Vonda would be arrested for even more charges such as grand theft, aggravated assault and battery, obstructing a police officer, unlawful possession of a firearm, driving with a suspended license, weapons charges, and more trafficking. Her involvement in the street would place her amongst the street dudes, as she was not scared to hang amongst the killers and dealers, which allowed her to brush shoulders with people who were already in the lifestyle of trafficking. As she made friends with some well-known street guys, she would learn the ins and outs watching them do what they did. Opportunity would strike for Vonda to become her own boss when hers by the name of Bunky Brown would be arrested and charged with various of crimes, putting him away for some time. But like they say in the streets, the show must go on. For every kingpin that falls, there's another one ready to fill that position, and that's exactly what happened. Everything will fall into her lap, as she had no problem developing the team because she was already familiar with the hitmen, traffickers, and dealers herself, as she was already shaking and moving in the streets. Avonda would take over Bunky's operation, but everything was already flowing, so all it took was for the right person that could lead, and everything else will fall in line. Ironically enough, Vonda also had an upper hand and advantage over others because the same port where drugs would come in, she would have close ties to the people that worked there, which made her able to receive product easier, where others would have a hard time doing so. Vonda's father, James Dowling, aka Big Jake, not just a longshoreman, but he was a high-ranking one as well. For those that are unfamiliar with what a longshoreman is, it's an individual who is responsible for loading and unloading cargo ships at ports and terminals. They're also known as dock workers. But it don't stop there, because not only was her father a dock worker, but so was her brother and the father of her children, Jerry Jackson, who was also her husband. The couple had 2 children, Gervonta and Vonshari Hordes, before divorcing in October 1992. So it's pretty easy to see the advantage that Vonda would have when it came to getting product over everybody else. And making it even easier for Vonda, the port of Miami wasn't far at all. It was just over the bridge, where a short drive from the port to Overtown is just a matter of minutes. Not only that, but her husband was already well established in the drug game, but he would be arrested for drug-related charges as well, and that pretty much ushered Avonda in to take more control over the streets, as she already had her connections. With her easy capabilities of getting her hands on product and now having control, she became the plug herself, supplying other dealers and traffickers, not just in Florida, but in the South, East, West. Avonda had clientele from all over. In the 80s, when the drug game was in full effect all over the world, as this new drug would take over in its earlier stages, Vonda and her operation began bubbling. But like everything else, especially the drug game, there will always be someone trying to take over and get you out the way, and for that, Vonda had enforcements. See, Vonda wasn't your typical woman. She ruled with an iron fist and handled her business just like any other man in the drug game. When it came down to business, she had special enforcers, as they were all hitmen ready to complete any mission that Vonda sent them on. She would pay them in money, or sometimes product, or sometimes both. One of Avonda's top lieutenants was Jamal Pukalata Brown, and the other was Robert Lee Rah-Rah Sawyer. Andre Bam McWhorter was a shooter that worked closer with Rah-Rah to protect Avonda's drug spots. Although Vonda's operation was bubbling, the game would change and she would adapt back in the late 80s when a new drug epidemic would hit the street known as cocaine. Cocaine was just a harder form of the product that was already selling, but this one was cheaper, and instead of snorting, users was able to smoke it. This right here would change the game and made dealers rich overnight. In Vonda's case, she was already moving the first part, so when she adapted with the times and switched to the other product, her status evolved even stronger, making her operation more and more rich. This would cause her to turn the apartments that she already had, as well as new ones, into operation hubs where they would turn the powder into rock for the new drug. In 1994, a Haitian by the name of Tony taught Avonda how to turn powder into rock. And after experimenting, Vonda learned and would begin selling this new product. When the drug came out, it was so sought after that anybody that can get their hands on it pretty much became rich overnight. So as long as you knew someone that can get it, you were almost guaranteed to make money. This would cause for a lot of crews to pop up, and within this time, street crews such as the John Does and Boobie Boys would begin to make a name for themselves and generate money as well. This would become a concern for Vonda because she was already established, which means that she already had her territory and clientele before these new crews would arise. However, whenever there's money involved, it's hard to just tell someone that they can't make it because you control the area that the money is in, and that usually leads to a turf war. Whoever originally had the area has to defend it, and a lot of the times it can turn deadly. And that's what happened. Not just with Vonda, but in the whole city of Miami. But with Vonda already being established, she had her connections already set in place and was well known by not only the street guys, but law enforcement as well. Everyone wants a piece of the pie, and that means no different for police. Vonda would have police on her payroll just to assure that everything ran pretty smooth. Vonda will also play chess to avoid warring with others, as she would give up criminal information on her competition in the streets to get them out the way. Now, some people would agree with it, and some just think that it's downright snitching and breaking the street code. But in the early 90s, things would get out of hand as many people lost their life defending drug territory, where Vonda's crew was in the middle of majority of the altercations. They won some, but they lost some as well, as Vonda mainly just charged it to the game. But within this street battle, people who had nothing to do with the war started losing their lives as well, and that's where things started taking a turn for the worse. Kids as young as 1 year old lost their lives, and another who was only 5 years old, and it didn't stop at kids because senior citizens lost their lives in the war too. And whenever you have bodies dropping in the street, especially involving kids and senior citizens, that causes unwanted attention from law enforcement. Now, even if they turn a blind eye to you making money illegally, when bodies start dropping, you're forcing police to step in and investigate, as they have to make the community feel safe, because if not, that means that they aren't doing their job. And then they look bad. Now, things got so out of hand that guys were using heavy artillery way more advanced than what local police had. Reports would say that in some instances, these guys were using hand grenades and military-styled assault rifles. In 1993, lasting for about 5 years to about 1998, the war between the Boobie boys and Avonda's gang would be on the rise, crippling Miami's economy. During this time, the Boobie boys would take great losses, as altogether there was at least 62 shooting deaths and another 36 wounded during the period. Some of the victims were riddled by as many as 99 bullet holes, and their faces were even blown off. During these years in the tit-for-tat battle, the Boobie boys would spark everything off, as they would kill Ra-Ra's close friend, Wallace Fortner. Then, the Boobie boys will also kill Willie Geeter and another man named E, who was affiliated with Avonda's crew as well. Now, Ra-Ra escaped many attempts on his life, at least 4, before he was actually shot traveling northbound on the I-95 back in September of 1997. While he was in the hospital, his wife told him that she spotted 2 of Boobie's associates in the hospital elevator and overheard them talking about trying to, quote, finish him off. But fortunately for Ra-Ra, nothing happened, and he would make it out the hospital alive. Now, Ra-Ra would soon get his lick back 3 months later in December, as he would spot Rogers, who was a Boobie boy affiliate who attempted to kill him several times, talking on his phone next to his car. Pukalata was driving, while Ra-Ra and Bam were passengers. They both will exit the car and approach Rogers as Bam fired his pistol, striking Rogers in the back of the leg, and Ra-Ra would finish Rogers off by firing his AK-47, striking Rogers into his face and chest. Sheesh. Detectives would later find out that Ra-Ra called Avonda right after the killing and found out that Avonda paid Ra-Ra $12,000 and 11 keys just for that hit. After the hit, Ra-Ra fled to Tallahassee to lay low. Now, although Ra was able to get away, Pukalata, who was the driver on the hit of Rogers, would be shot the very next day, and unfortunately for him, he was hit in his neck, leaving him paralyzed, having to operate in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. In the late 90s, around 1997, as a response to all the deadly violence taking place in Miami, a task force targeting these gangs were formed between local and federal authorities. The feds came up with a plan to clean up the streets first by looking into everybody's case that involved weapons that was recently banned prior to the year, and further investigated all those individuals on a federal level, which would make the punishments even harsher. All state cases against these individuals that involved guns were dropped, but before they could celebrate, the feds picked all those cases right on up. Feds could use the RICO statute and also put gang members away on gun charges and convict them on charges that the state couldn't. As we all know, the federal conviction rate has been almost 100% for the past decade, and back then it was no different, although it was mostly aimed at the mob. Now, to begin things off, the feds would include mandatory minimums for the convictions of these weapon charges. Once they had a game plan in order, the feds would target all the big shots, including Kenneth Boobie Williams, the head of the Boobie boys, Vonda Jackson, who was the head of the Vonda crew, and everybody who helped control these organizations from the second in commands down to the soldiers. Figuring that this would cripple these organizations, because without the head around, the body shall fall. At the time, the three biggest organizations spread across Florida was the John Does, the Boobie Boys, and Vonda's organizations. And as y'all know, the feds don't play fair at all. When they come with evidence and proof already, looking to hand out sentences instead of negotiating like the state do. So with that being said, remember those minimums that we spoke about? Well, the minimums weren't that minimum because they consisted of 10 years minimum if convicted by the feds. With everyone that got locked up having no guidance and no way of maintaining structure within these thriving organizations, crime dropped periodically as all the shot callers were now either dead or in jail. Now, not only was this a chess move by the feds because it did clear the streets, but we know that within every organization, it'll be a miracle if there wasn't at least one person willing to cooperate for lesser time. Unfortunately, in Vonda's case, there were several people willing to give up all types of intel involving their crew. The feds moved in on the Boobie Boys first, and more than 25 members of the Boobie Boys were arrested. Now, Boobie himself was suspected in at least 15 murders. He escaped along with some of his associates and then went into hiding. The U.S. Marshals caught up with Boobie on May 17, 1999, alone and unarmed, as he left an apartment in a green Ford pickup he was driving under a different alias. U.S. Marshals in Miami said, quote, "We did a traffic stop on him. There was no confrontation, no weapons found, and Boobie admitted to whom he was." Shortly after, Kenneth Boobie Williams was sentenced to life in prison. After that, they would go after Vonda and her crew, after Vonda's lieutenants and soldiers began snitching on each other. And when you have crews that play that hard, it's almost already expected. In the early year of 1999, Vonda was arrested and refused bail as she had to spend a few years in prison fighting her case. The feds would already know that Vonda was the leader, so they would just target everybody else to cooperate against Vonda, as she was the one they really wanted in the first place. They would give up murders that was committed during their war with the Boobie Boys, along with other gangs over territory, during their testimony in front of a grand jury. The lieutenants who were second in command would throw all the bodies on Vonda, stating that they only allowed guys from the Boobie Boys because they were ordered to by Vonda, admitting that they were also paid money to carry out these hits. When it came time for trial, over 50 witnesses came forward testifying against Vonda. In the midst of all those 50 were Rara and Pukalata. Now, Pukalata told authorities he met the Queenpin in the summer of 1993 through a mutual friend when he was 16 years old. He started working for Vonda as a street-level dealer who received about $1,000 per week. Pukalata moved into Vonda's duplex on Northwest 50th Street, where she taught him how to cook crack cocaine and gave him other responsibilities as well. On January 1st, 1998, Pukalata was shot in front of his duplex. He survived but was paralyzed and confined to a wheelchair, unable to fend for himself. In December of 2001, Rara testified before a grand jury that he first met Vonda in the early 1980s before the advent of the crack era. At that time, she was married to Jerry Jackson, who was running a lucrative drug business in the Overtown area. Rara bought drugs from Vonda until his incarceration in 1985. Released in 1986, he continued to make small purchases of cocaine. Eventually, Jerry Jackson went to prison and Vonda took over his drug business, according to Rara. Now, in the end, Ra and Pukalata pleaded guilty for their involvement in the gang, and on February 2nd, 2004, Pukalata received a 25-year sentence. Rara testified against Vonda, but didn't want to be put on the stand, and although he entered a guilty bargain, he still received over 40 years. Now, on the other hand, Vonda would escape scot-free and not be charged for the bodies. Fortunately for her, prosecutors were originally seeking to give Vonda the death penalty. However, in 2003, on November 14th, at 40 years old, she was sentenced to the max time, which consisted of only 20 years. Now look at that. Two of her main guys turned around and testified against her, and somehow still ended up with more time than she did, despite them snitching. Sheesh. Now, on a more personal tip, aside from the street stuff, people who knew Vonda would say that she had a heart of gold, but she didn't take no crap. We don't hear much about her, but she played the game as hard as any man out there, and in fact, harder than most men out there that we see today. Although she faced a death penalty, she stayed solid throughout and never opened her mouth, not once. She took her 20 years on the chin, and though I don't glorify being in the streets, risking your freedom, or this type of behavior, But I am a huge advocate of if you do the crime, you do the time. Snitching on others when you voluntarily participated in the street life has to be the lowest thing that you can do. Another thing to note about Avonda is that she was bisexual and always kept women around her. Legend has it that she even had a stripper pole and stage in her house where she also would provide women for men as long as their money was right. Now it seems to me that Vonda lived a life and she received her time 2 decades ago already, so I'm sure that when she gets out, people are going to rush to do podcasts and interviews with her, because if I'm not mistaken, she was sentenced and everything in 2003. We're already in 2024, so any day now, right? She has a very interesting story where most people don't even make it out to even tell, right? Let alone be a woman at that, because they either got a whole bunch of jail time, way more than 20, either that or they dead. Right? They're no longer here to pretty much tell us a story. And I'm not talking about your street level dealers. I'm not talking about your little guys. I'm talking about the Pablo Escobar type guys, you know, the big guys, right? Because that's the level that Avonda was on, believe it or not, right? And you got to remember, everyone glorified the Spanish when it comes to moving product in Miami due to the movies, but Avonda had a lot of money. She had a lot of control. The main ways people get drugs in through Miami are the ports. So imagine having the ports on lockdown due to being related to the dock workers. As y'all know, her father was a dock worker, a high level one, and her brothers and her husband was, right? And having police on your side, I mean, she got the whole recipe. She didn't need nothing. Keep in mind, they say that the Boobie boys had an empire that valued over $80 million, right? So if she was in the game way before them and had way deeper connections than them, how much y'all think she really had? And keep in mind that they say the police weren't able to find neither one of their money, right? They wasn't able to find Boobie's money or Vonda's money. So it's no telling how much money Avonda had. And I guess when she gets out, if I was her, I'll go try looking for it myself. All right, so that's pretty much it, y'all. This was a very interesting story, and I feel that this story had to get out there because a lot of people don't know about Avonda. We speak a lot about the kingpins this, kingpins that, and even when we do speak about the queenpins or the ladies that were dangerous in the streets, we hear the same names over and over and over. And even the ones that we don't hear is just low-level ones that were probably trafficking and, you know, little things like that. But Avonda was on a very, very, very big scale, and I hope that maybe they do a movie or something about her. You know, it'll be interesting because, like I said, it's coming from a female's point of view. We always hear about the guys' point of view, how they did this, the narcos, the Colombians. We always hear that. But, you know, from a black woman that came from pretty much nothing. And then, like I said, another thing that people don't understand, they keep thinking that we're glorifying the bad stuff. What I also want to shed light on is the fact that she did a lot of charitable stuff for the community. We hear the Escobars, you know, all the time. Pablo, he did this for the community. He built schools, he built churches, he did this. But she was pretty much doing the same thing. Yes, the way she was getting it was, you know, frowned upon. She was making the money, you know, not the right way. But she was giving back. She was paying people rent. She was paying people utility bills. She was putting kids through college. Right? When do you hear that? Right? You have a government that's not even trying to do that unless you're trying to take out a loan or something. But she was doing it free of charge, right? And then shout out to her son Javante Jackson. As y'all know, he played for the Eagles. So it's like she did her thing. You know, even though she was in the street, she made sure her son was successful. Whoever it was that made sure he was successful, I'm pretty sure when she get out, he's definitely going to take care of his mom, and that's what's up. Y'all jump in the comments, let me know what y'all think about this. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Hit that bell so you're notified every time we drop new content. And remember, as long as you keep on watching, I'm going to keep on dropping. And I'm out.